What if the official story of a major international crisis wasn't the whole story? Today, we're diving into an unpublished memoir from a former Indian Army chief, and it reveals a secret history of the 2020 India-China border crisis. This was a moment when two nuclear powers came terrifyingly, unbelievably, close to all-out war. So what really happened on that mountain pass? Let's get into it. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in eastern Ladakh. It's this desolate, brutally beautiful, and incredibly strategic landscape. I mean, we're on the roof of the world here. Every single mountain pass, every inch of high ground gives you a critical military advantage. And on one specific night, that advantage was about to be put to the test. The date is August 31st, 2020. The time, 8:15 p.m. An absolutely alarming phone call comes into the Indian Army's Northern Command. And the message is as urgent as it gets. Chinese tanks, 4 of them, backed by infantry, are pushing up a mountain track straight towards a pass called Rechin. They are closing in on Indian positions on the Kailash Range, strategic high ground that Indian forces had, get this, just seized hours earlier. An Indian warning shot does nothing. The tanks just keep coming. So you've got the Army Chief, General Naravane, and he is scrambling. He's making urgent calls to India's top political leaders, the defense minister, the national security advisor. See, his standing orders were crystal clear. You do not open fire unless you get the okay from the very top. But as those Chinese tanks creep closer and closer, he's getting nothing. No clear directive. His question to everyone is the same. What are my orders? Finally, at 10:30 p.m., the defense minister calls back. He's spoken to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the instruction? It's just a single sentence. Do whatever you deem appropriate. It was to be a purely military decision. As Naravane writes in his own words, I had been handed a hot potato. With this carte blanche, the onus was now totally on me. I mean, think about that for a second. This hot potato left the general completely on his own, with the decision to start or to avoid a war with China resting squarely on his shoulders. So how on earth did it come to this? To really understand what was happening on the night of August 31st, we need to rewind a few months. We have to look at the pattern of rising aggression all along the line of actual control. That's the poorly marked and, well, fiercely disputed border between India and China. The thing is, this crisis had been building for weeks. It started in early May with these tense face-offs in the Galwan Valley. By the middle of the month, the Chinese PLA had set up new positions with armored vehicles. Then, over at Pangong Lake, Indian patrols were literally pushed back by PLA soldiers in full riot gear. All of this boiled over on June 15th in a brutal, deadly clash. And when we say clash, look at this. It was almost medieval. No shots were fired. Instead, soldiers fought with fists, stones, and even batons wrapped in barbed wire. This was the first deadly fight on the India-China border in over 40 years. And the human cost was staggering. 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives that day in that freezing, high-altitude environment. Which brings us right back to that incredibly tense night of August 31st. With the memory of Galwan still fresh in everyone's minds, General Naravane was facing an absolutely impossible decision as those Chinese tanks rolled towards his men. The question was really that stark. Does he give the order to open fire with artillery and probably kick off a full-blown war? Or could he find another way to stop the advance? The fate of 2 nuclear-armed nations was literally hanging in the balance. So faced with this hot potato, Naravane came up with this brilliant strategy of maximum deterrence without firing the first shot. First, he decided India could not be the one to start it. Second, he ordered his own tanks, medium tanks, right up to the forward slopes of the pass. And then he had them point their main guns directly at the approaching Chinese tanks. The signal was unmistakable. Come 1 foot closer and we will fire. And you know what? It worked. The Chinese tanks, now staring down the barrels of heavier Indian armor, just stopped, dead in their tracks. In Naravane's own words, it was a game of bluff, and the PLA blinked first. An absolute disaster was avoided by a thread. But look, just because war was averted that night doesn't mean the crisis was over, not by a long shot. What came next was a long, complicated, and very secretive period of negotiation. And the solution they came up with, well, it had some hidden costs. So military commanders from both sides started meeting. But Naravane's memoir reveals a huge problem. For the first 9 rounds of these talks, no official records or minutes were kept. None. He says this led to grave repercussions, because agreements made in principle could just be denied or twisted later on. The key result of all these talks was the creation of buffer zones. Basically, both armies would pull back from the hotspots, creating a kind of no man's land. Now, while this did reduce the immediate risk of another clash, it also meant that Indian troops could no longer go to areas they had regularly patrolled before May 2020. And you can see it happening right here. These images from February 2021 show that disengagement process in action near Pangong Lake, with both sides pulling back their tanks and their troops, creating this brand new geography of separation. So let's be really clear here. The status quo was not restored. Instead, a new reality was created on the ground where India lost access to territory it used to patrol. Now, in the long run, this is a big deal. Giving up the ability to patrol means you lose situational awareness, you cede a degree of control. It can actually change the strategic balance. The Indian government, though, they publicly called this a diplomatic success. But the details of these concessions, they were kept away from public and parliamentary debate. And that brings us to the memoir itself and the really big questions its suppression raises. Why is this first-hand account from the man at the absolute center of the crisis being kept from the public? This is the book 4 Stars of Destiny. It contains all of these explosive revelations, and it has been stuck in limbo for over a year. The publishers are still just waiting for a review from the Defense Ministry. And when you put the 2 stories side by side, wow, the contrast is just staggering. The official story talks about decisive leadership and proactive operations where no territory was lost. But Naravane's memoir, it reveals a moment of political abdication, a desperate last-minute defense, and, crucially, the concession of patrolling rights through these new buffer zones. The source material really nails it with this quote. A government unwilling to level with the public about how close India came to escalation cannot credibly claim strategic confidence. And that gets right to the heart of it all, doesn't it? It's this tension between managing a political story and being honest about national security. And that leaves us with one final critical question to think about. When the first-hand account of an army chief who stood on the brink of war is kept under wraps, what is really being protected? The security of the nation or the image of its leaders?